Okay, Jesus may have existed, but what else can we say about him? The only biographies we have were written by his supporters, so you might think they're bound to be biased. And isn't it possible that they've been changed again and again down through the centuries? We all know how stories can grow in the telling. When they do, people end up believing all sorts of things that just aren't true. George Washington never did chop down his father's cherry tree. There's no evidence that Dick Whittington ever had a cat. There aren't any alligators in the sewers of New York. So could the stories about Jesus be legends like that? Well, no. We know the stories haven't changed. We have manuscripts of the Gospels going way, way back, and so many of them, 5,000 to 6,000, that we know for sure they haven't been changed since they were first written. We also know they were written quite early. They didn't appear many, many years after the death of Jesus. They were compiled at a time when lots of people were still around who had been there and remembered the facts clearly. In fact, in one of his letters, the Apostle Paul, one of the first Christian leaders, talks about the fact that Jesus rose from the dead. And then he says, he was seen by over 500 people, and most of them are still alive. In other words, if you don't believe me, talk to the witnesses. There are plenty of them. Not even Jesus' enemies denied that the miracles had really happened. They wrote that he had done them through sorcery and magic, but they never denied that he'd done them. It's 200 years before you first find somebody saying, maybe they never happened. People who lived earlier than that never made such a claim. Why? Maybe because they knew something really had happened, just like the Gospels said. Dan Brown, who wrote the famous novel The Da Vinci Code, asserted that there were about 80 Gospels that could have been chosen for the Bible. And if the church had gone with some of the others, we'd have a very different picture of Jesus. This is just fantasy. There certainly aren't 80 others. Nobody knows where on earth he got that figure from. And the other so-called Gospels don't contain any worthwhile historical details about Jesus. They're all fanciful romances, made up around 200 years later by people who didn't know anything about Jesus really, but were just trying to cash in. You can read any of them on the internet, because they haven't been suppressed. They're all out there for anybody to look at. And if you scan through a few of them, you'll see very quickly that this hopeless stuff is very different from the real Gospels in the Bible. It's contradictory, unhistorical, and sensationalist. No wonder that soon after the end of the first century, maybe 80 years after Jesus' death, there was already a manuscript circulating between the churches called the Fourfold Gospel. It contained Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because already everybody could see that these books are on a different level to any of the other accounts of Jesus. People have been trying for at least the last 250 years to show that there are mistakes in the Gospels, and they failed again and again. Scholars now have a much greater respect for the Gospel writers than they ever did before, because intensive testing has shown just how careful they were to get their facts straight. Luke especially is one of the best historians of that whole period. So all those original stories, all those haunting sayings, and all those amazing teachings came from somebody who really did what the books say. If you're in any doubt, read a Gospel right through. You'll find that Jesus steps out of the pages as a unique, unforgettable character who couldn't be made up. He really did those things.